Oh yeah. 3, 2, 1.
I have a selection here of some coffees that I have received from either friends or from samples or that we sell on our shelves. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how the things that are on coffee bags end up on coffee bags. Because I know it can be very confusing. I have this experience every time I try to go buy wine at a store. I look at a label and I'm like, I don't know what any of this means. And I know that it probably means something important, but I don't have the context necessary to understand why this matters to me. So let's talk coffee. So there's different styles of coffee out there. They're often referred to in terms of waves. So you have kind of the first wave of coffee, and that was when coffee was kind of being industrialized. Back in the day, before we had supermarkets, coffee was actually sold in its green form. And you would buy bags of green coffee and you would roast it in a pan on a stove at home. And then you'd grind it with a little hand grinder, or it was mounted to a table, and then you'd make coffee that way. So back in like the early 1900s to kind of 1920s-ish, coffee started being mass produced and put in, roasted and then ground and put into sealed cans. Many brands which you are probably familiar, called like Maxwell House. Not my house, but Maxwell House, Folgers, U-Ban, Farmer Brothers. All of those are coffee brands that you're familiar with because they come out of a can at a grocery store. That's what we call the first wave of coffee. Now the second wave of coffee was kind of when coffee shops became a big thing in the United States anyway. They've been big in a lot of other places for a while, but in the United States we refer to the second wave as kind of those shops. Also that made coffee less about just a caffeine hit, but also something to be enjoyed. So think like, your Starbucks of the world, or your drive-through coffee stands that have flavorings that you can add to your coffees. So those kind of became big. That was called second wave. Then there are what we call third wave shops, or some people are even calling them like new wave shops now, or even some are trying to call them fourth wave, but I still think they're third wave. That's probably another good topic for another video. But for now, you can think of those types of coffee shops as coffee shops that try to honor the work that's done on a coffee farm and help elevate the status of a coffee farmer to somebody who is a respected member of the supply chain, hopefully to more equitably distribute money across the entire supply chain. So the idea is that I think it's 3 out of 5 coffee farmers throughout the world undergo food scarcity issues throughout the year. So the idea is that if we can help elevate their status, and not just their status, but help the end consumer understand that they're the most critical component of coffee tasting good, then we can help right some of those wrongs along the way. So why this all matters is that's how you ended up with a lot of information that seems to not make any sense on a coffee bag. And that underlies the entire reason why a lot of those things come on a coffee bag. But I have here in front of me a few different examples of coffee bags that have either a lot of information or less information. And so we can talk through why those things matter. So I'd like to start by talking about Dune's coffee bag here. So this is Dune Coffee. They are based out of Santa Barbara, California. They are a roastery that is kind of a part of a coffee shop, a small chain, like 2 or 3 shops in Santa Barbara called the French Press. And this is their roasting operation. And they are absolutely killing it. They're doing a really fantastic job, but they have a great example of a coffee bag with very little information on it. And a lot of this is as a reaction to bags with more information and kind of people feeling a little put out and intimidated by the information that's on them. So I wanted to highlight an example of a bag that starts with very little information. So in this case, they have a country. So this coffee comes from Colombia. And then they have a name on here. And this one is Elier Ortiz Diaz. So that's the name of the producer. So this is the gentleman who owns the farm. And then under here they have some tasting notes. So they say this coffee tastes like white grape, cane sugar, and is crisp. Now, tasting notes are a big point of confusion for people when they buy coffee. A lot of times when you see those, you think, oh, white grape and cane sugar. Does that mean that the coffee is flavored with grape and with cane sugar? But that's not actually what's happening. See, the tasting notes on here are to say that this coffee tastes kind of like these things. So you have a lot of different coffee options available on your shelf, and it's hard to know which one you want. And so if they can tell you a little bit about what it tastes like, that way, because you haven't had a sample yet, then the idea is that you can make a more informed decision. So it's really helpful to know once you've gained a little bit more background on coffee. So you've had a number of different coffees from Colombia or from Ethiopia or from Kenya. So you have all of that background information that you can then apply to this. So for example, for myself, I'm a professional. I've been tasting coffees for a long time. I know, generally speaking, that coffees from Colombia kind of have a wide range of flavor profiles compared to most other countries, but most of the ones that are kind of general coffee shop coffees, those tend to have a little bit more of a soft, more like chocolatey, classic kind of flavor profile, but sometimes a little bit fruity. So this one has a white grape. So white grapes are not super intensely fruity. They're not like berry type of fruity, but it also has a sugar note. So it's got cane sugar. So I know this coffee is probably gonna be sweet. So it's probably gently fruity, maybe a slightly high acidity because the white grape is a little bit more acidic than like a red grape would be. But I know that's gonna have a nice dense sweetness to hold that coffee down, but its flavor profile is gonna be crisp. So that crisp and white grape note kind of helped me know that. So that's a very simple coffee bag. Now we can look into some more complicated ones. Like this one here gets a little bit more. So this is from Dapper and Wise Coffee Roasters. They're based out of Portland, Oregon. And this coffee comes from Peru, right? So generally speaking, the way that a coffee is named is going to be either the most specific piece of information available about the coffee. So that could be the lot number, the variety, which we'll talk more about. It could be the farm name or the producer's name, or in some places, or in some cases, they'll just put the coffee's origin or the main country that it comes from as the most big piece of info about the coffee. Now, they also have whole bean coffee on here. And a lot of places will put either whole bean or whole seed or ground coffee on there. But an easy way that you can tell is just by feeling the bag, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with that, but you can feel if it packs down kind of tight, you know that there's probably ground coffee in there. But if it kind of has a little bit more room to move, or you can even feel the profile of seeds in there, then you know that it's probably whole seed. Now there's one other component down here that says comforting. So a lot of places, and we actually do this here at Narrative, will break up coffees in terms of either like a comforting or a classic, or we call it tame, or you could do it as like an adventurous or a little bit more exhilarating, or we call it wild. Those are kind of two different schools of thought. So if you like dark roasts and you like robust flavors, you probably want the more comforting coffees. And if you like coffees that are a little fruitier or a little bit more floral, you want a wild coffee. So they've got that on there. Then this one here is really fun because this is from Intelligentsia. They're a large-scale roasting operation, at least a large-scale for third wave. They're arguably some of the first people to popularize third wave, so this is a very classic coffee bag to look at when looking at third wave coffee. But this one here is from Ethiopia. It's from Tikaran Besa, and this one is an organic espresso roast. This one came from my friend Matt. But they actually have a little story on here about that they taste, like their coffee team tasted 45 unique flavors in the coffee. So I know that this coffee is probably going to be very complex. And this is one of those coffees that if you really enjoy kind of looking for flavors in coffee and finding all the different expressions of coffee's flavor, this would be a really good one to look at. All right, and then here's one from Kenya. It's roasted by Velton's Coffee here in Everett, Washington. And this is a great example of a place where there's a lot of information on a coffee bag. So we're gonna talk through all this. All right, so I'm gonna get some coffee first. All right, so this coffee comes from Kenya. Kenya's right here, first thing. Then underneath it, it has the mill name or the washing station, or in Kenya, they actually call these factories. This one is called Gichatha Ini, and it's Gikanda AA. So in Kenya, Tanzania, and even a couple of other countries, you'll see AA or AB or PB, and those are actually size ratings. So there's different screen sizes that coffee goes through after it's been picked and processed that helps separate out the largest seeds from the smallest seeds. Then it shows elevation, and it shows 1600 to 1800, and it says MASL. Now MASL stands for meters above sea level. And if you're anything like me, being from the United States, that doesn't mean a whole lot to you because you don't have a reference in terms of meters for elevation. But you know, it's 16 to 1800 meters. I don't have the math on me, but I think that's somewhere around like 6,000 feet of elevation. But I should double check before we put this on the internet. That way I don't get completely lambasted. Then there's varieties down here. So this one is from Kenya. Kenya varieties are really fun because they have a lot of numbers in them. So this one says SL28, SL34, Riru 11, and Baitan. So SL stands for Scott Labs. They're a company that was paid money back in, like, I think it was the 30s, I want to say, to come into Kenya and to hybridize different coffees that would be made ideal for growing in Kenyan climate. So SL is their proprietary numbering system for their coffees that they developed. So this one was SL28, which is widely regarded as the most delicious variety in Kenyan coffees and just coffee in general. And SL34. Then there's Riru 11, and that's a little bit newer variety, and Baitan. So varieties are really fascinating. There are some that are really, really well regarded. So the big one would be Gesha. Those coffees sell for a lot of money because they taste very, very good. And some varieties tend to take terroir a little bit better. Now, terroir is a sense of place, or that is, it's the exact kind of microclimate that a coffee is grown in. So some varieties, like Bourbon, for instance, will taste vastly different if it's grown in Burundi than if it's grown in Indonesia, because the climates are different and the soil composition is different. Some varieties don't take terroir nearly as well as others. So Gesha is a great example of that, where a Gesha that's grown in Panama tastes a lot more similar to a Gesha grown in Colombia than those Bourbons do to each other from either other of those countries. There's some other big name varieties out there that are really popular. Pacamara, Maragogipe. Typica is like the most typical one. It's kind of the main lineage and stock that most coffee grown around the world comes from. But there's plenty of other ones too out there. The rare ones get out there and they fetch a high price. Sidra is a really common one right now that's fetching a lot of money. So varieties are an interesting thing to keep a track of. So those are kind of the big things on here. Now, those kind of matter, but they're not the biggest deal. There are some things that are a really big deal, and I really like the way that Velton kind of prioritizes his information on his bags. So Kenya is a big one, then the producer, the factory name is down here, and then the roast date's pretty big on here. Now, roast dates, they're kind of a big deal. You want coffee that's fresh, and when I say fresh, I mean like a month and a half old or less. There are a lot of people out there who really, really hit the freshness thing hard. They want coffee that's like roasted like 2 days ago, or it's not fresh to them. And that's crazy, frankly. Most coffee doesn't even taste good after it's only 2 days off roast. So you don't even want to be drinking that. Your ideal window kind of depends on how the coffee was roasted. Generally speaking, darker roasted coffees taste better when they're fresher, and lighter roasted coffees taste a little bit better with a little more age on them, but it's sort of not an exact science. The best person to ask about how a good range of dates on your coffees are is probably the barista that's worked with those coffees, or even the roaster themselves. So if you buy your coffee from a coffee shop, you should ask the barista, hey, like, do you have a general recommendation on the best age range to get into this coffee at? Because they're gonna have a way better idea of when that coffee's gonna taste good, because they've been tasting it and working with it for a while. Anyway, that's how you decode a coffee bag. That was a whole lot of information. So, pause the video. If you need to know more about anything else, it probably would be helpful for you to know that before we started, but it is what it is. So anyway, if you have any more questions about bags, if you have any questions about coffee and how it gets packaged or merchandised, hint, flavor descriptors is a marketing tool. And a lot of times, certain roasters will make their coffee sound a little better than it actually tastes. So if you want to deep dive into any of that kind of stuff, if you want to get into the nitty gritty about any of that stuff, let me know. We can go deeper onto some of that stuff, or I can answer it in the comments thread. So appreciate you. Thanks for watching. We'll hope that you will take some time to share this with your friends. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff that you hear on YouTube all the time. We're just getting going. So literally anything that you can do to help us get our name out there and tell your friends about would be super helpful. And I appreciate you so very much. Have a good week, and we'll see you guys later. Cheers.